Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. Israel's military has stated that it has struck targets in 2 southern Lebanese towns after ordering the evacuation of the buildings that it alleged were being used by Hezbollah terrorists. The strikes have come a day after Israel and Lebanon sent civilian envoys to a committee overseeing a fragile ceasefire agreed a year ago that both sides have now accused each other of violating. Both countries have stated that the envoys would broaden the scope of talks between the long-time adversaries. This is the latest that we are tracking on the broadcast. Meanwhile, we do know that the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has stated that the next round of talks with Israel will begin next week, that is on the 19th of December. This is a fresh wave of strikes which has come even as envoys from both countries have met. Remember, this meeting has taken place in the presence of officials from the United States of America, France, the UN peacekeeping mission as well. With us on the broadcast is Dr. Punsara Amarasinghe, Middle East Affairs expert. He's from the Kotlawala Defense University in Colombo. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you, we're seeing kinetic action on the ground even as talks are underway between the Lebanese and the Israelis. Where do you see this headed next? Is there going to be any fruitful or concrete decision that comes around, because the next round is slated to take place on the 19th?
Yeah, I think one might say that there seems to be quite a blow on the fragile ceasefire agreement between Lebanon and Israel. It goes without saying that since the commencement of the ceasefire agreement in 2024 November, nearly 1,200 raids are being conducted by IDF in the territory of Lebanon under the guise of self-defense. So we need to look at this problem through a nuanced picture. So this continuity of Israeli military strikes, especially in southern Lebanon, will not entirely undermine this ceasefire agreement or the peace talks between Beirut and Jerusalem, as Israel has clearly emphasized the fact that as long as Hezbollah remains solid in South Lebanon, as long as Hezbollah poses existential threat upon the Jewish land, they would continue military strikes. So this has been the case with regard to the latest escalation in South Lebanon. And if you look at these territories, if you look at this situation in depth, and you would come across the fact that the civilians were warned by IDF a couple of hours prior to this attack. And the IDF has clearly spotted that these targeted places were occupied by Hezbollah militants, and they intended to be the warehouse, which would be providing arms and strength for the Hezbollah organization. So IDF has clearly left a strong message indicating that they would not step back from completely dismantling Hezbollah from Lebanese territory. So that seems to be a fact on the ground. And also we need to understand that for the past few months, despite having had all these ceasefire agreement and the potential peace talks, IDF has been conducting the military strikes in Lebanon. So this is not a very surprising element with this recent escalation.
Absolutely, sir. Requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates regarding what's taking place between Israel and Lebanon. We're learning that Lebanese President Joseph Aoun has, of course, informed that the next round of talks with Israel will commence on the 19th of December. Now, according to him, the first session earlier this week was not expected to be highly productive, but helped lay the groundwork for future meetings. The meeting, of course, included Israeli and Lebanese civilian representatives and are the first direct discussions in decades. He has stated that the aim of the process is to avoid a second war between the two countries. Additionally, Lebanese Minister of Information Paul Marcos has further stressed that the Lebanese president wants negotiations to prevail over the language of war. Listen in.
It is the history as these talks would mark the very first attempt of
الإنتاج، ولكنها مهدت الطريق لجلسات مقبلة ستبدأ في 19 من الشهر الحالي. وحتى الآن ردود الفعل على الاجتماع الأول كانت إيجابية، وهذا ما يجب أن نستغله لتحقيق هدفنا بإبعاد شبح الحرب الثانية على لبنان.
Still with us on the broadcast is Dr. Punasara Amarasinghe. Interesting development, particularly the delegations that were involved yesterday. I mentioned earlier that there were representatives from the United States, from France as well, and the UN peacekeeping mission. It does seem that the US in particular is quite keen to ensure the disarmament of Hezbollah. France, of course, considering the fact that it was one of the original colonial powers in the 18th and 19th and 20th century, I beg your pardon, in Lebanon. That, of course, has been a factor for it being there. But there have, of course, also been a lot of contentions, a lot of opposition raised by Israel with regards to the United Nations and the UNI. FIL's operations in Lebanon. There were reports that had come in that some of the safe houses were being used by the Hezbollah terrorists that was being used by these terrorists to strike on Israel. What do you make of the delegations that were involved in that particular meeting that has just concluded?
Well, I think besides the pessimism, we need to look at the better side of this potential negotiation between those two states, which are being completely hostile to each other for decades. And this marks the very first attempt made by both Israel and Lebanon coming to the roundtable discussions for the past 40 years. And most importantly, we should not forget the fact that for the first time in Lebanese history, they have involved the civil participation in this negotiation. The Lebanese president has sent a civilian called Simon Karam, a Lebanese lawyer, who would be heading the negotiation team in Washington, D.C. in the days to come. And this is a completely greater development, paving the path to enhance the ties between those two states. But at the same time, we can't be too much optimistic that this will be something akin to Abraham Accords. Not at all, because the Beirut has not yet shown a slightest indication of renewing or restoring the diplomatic ties with Israel. From Lebanon's side, so their main task is to get back their hostages and completely sending the Israeli troops away from the Lebanese territory. So these are the two main chips lying from the Lebanese side, while Israel wants to somehow disarm Hezbollah. So it's a kind of a win-win situation, and also it's quite ambivalent, because even despite having had the initiative made by those two countries, it has been quite clear the Hezbollah has not shown a slightest desire or interest in this for a complete disarmament. Hezbollah has clearly shown that if they disarm, if they completely withdraw their troops from Lebanon, the territory of Lebanon, Israeli position will be more and more strong. So, as you clearly pointed out at the very beginning, the peace seems to be very much fragile in the days to come.
All right, sir. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time, of course, sharing your insights and analysis with our viewers. On that note, we're shifting focus to further developments coming in. We're learning that an Israeli delegation is in Cairo to push for the return of the last Gaza hostages' remains. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office has informed that the delegation is holding talks under the US-brokered ceasefire efforts, aiming to secure the immediate return of the last hostage. On Wednesday, the remains of a Thai worker were returned to Israel, and following that, authorities pledged to work ceaselessly to bring home the remains of Ran Gwili, an officer in an elite police unit, who, of course, was one of the hostages for the last 2 years. With us on the broadcast is Major General Sudhakarji, International Relations and Strategic Defense expert, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We're seeing the fact that almost all the bodies have been returned, almost all the conditions of the first phase of the ceasefire have been implemented. One of the hostages' remains are slated to be sent back. There's a meeting taking place in Cairo. What are your expectations from this meeting? And does this then pave the way for the second phase, for the international stabilization force to move in and the disarmament of Hamas to take place?
Brilliant. Very sharp and brilliant point that you have raised in the question. That is what the moot issue is.
Thank you.
You see, I would take back people who are joining the dots and reading multiple products, media products of Western as also Eastern products. There is something which I want to share through you and through the platform. You see, the officials, they say that they will not advance to phase 2 of the US plan without the hostages, the remaining hostages coming back. Okay. And they have been stressing that Hamas must intensify its search efforts, adding that Jerusalem is ready to supply equipment or assist directly as pressure from mediators continues. Now, why am I actually highlighting this aspect is, although the delegation is there, delegation led by the government's coordinator of hostages and missing person, Brigadier General is Gal Harsh, and he has held talks in Cairo on Thursday with Egyptians and Qatari mediators in an effort to recover the body of Master Sergeant Ran Givili, GVILI. The last hostage still in Gaza. The Prime Minister's office has articulated and shared this information. Now, my take on the whole issue is that Israel needs to keep on persisting and put their act together to get the last hostage back from the Hamas and utilize all the resources at its disposal. Because why am I saying is that the Shin Bet, the security service and the Mossad also are pointing in the same direction of the Prime Minister's office, and they have agreed to focus on an intensive and immediate effort to bring the mission and bring the hostage back, the missing person, to full completion. Everyone seems to be putting all the acts together. Where is the hitch? Why isn't Hamas parting with this? This is a core issue. As per my input and my assessment, the Hamas is actually intending to delay. Now, this delay is not acceptable. I personally feel, my take on the whole issue is that Israeli efforts must go on in a very coordinated and synergized manner, the way it is undertaken now. It must also, need be, do collaboration with the non-stakeholders. You see, for Israel, Qataris may be a non-stakeholder. For me, anyone and everyone who is of relevance or irrelevance but going to contribute towards getting the last hostage back is very, very relevant and very important. Therefore, they should not ignore any opportunity or any factor coming their way. That must be factored in, and they should put in their last bit of effort to get the last hostage back from the Hamas clutches.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us because we're tracking some breaking developments coming in, this time from New Delhi itself. We're learning that Russian President Vladimir Putin